Today I'm making Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber. For this build, I used EVA foam dowels, EVA foam triangle strips, craft foam, coffee foam, putty, super glue, knurled screws, PVC pipe cutter, a wooden dowel, regular wood, reflective tape, clear packing tape, paint, cutting tools, sanding tools, safety gear, Luke Skywalker's second lightsaber, because it contains the kyber crystal formerly belonging to Qui-Gon Jinn, a glass of gin, build responsively, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I started with the foam dowel. I soon realized that a half dowel would work much better for the body of the saber, all except for the pommel, so I cut a section of that and then carved a trench down the length of it, first with the razor pen and then with the rotary tool, until it was wide enough to accommodate the lightsaber blade. The razor pen was just to cut down on the amount of dust that was going to get kicked up, because there is a ton of dust. See, that's why you want to wear a mask. So I used a length of PVC pipe for the core. This is going to run most of the length of the saber. I cut it off with a PVC cutter. I cut an extra inch or so off of this, just because it doesn't have to go all the way to the base, the pommel of the lightsaber. Like, I do need a stopper in there. I glued the PVC pipe into the trench that I carved. To make the grip, I'm going to use the offcut from here, which doesn't seem to be long enough, but once it's all cut up and properly spaced, that should be more than enough. Yeah, let's just throw the word piece. Good job, Jake. It's made of foam. I cut that into strips, well, arches, I guess, about 1/4 inch wide. Or, you could just wrap it in thin strips of craft foam, but I don't know, this takes about the same amount of time. So there's a little bit of a space there, which means I'm gonna have to go on a case-by-case basis with each one, trimming off a little bit so that it decreases the circumference and adheres flat to the pipe. Hopefully that's not going to cause... No, that shouldn't cause ridges. Yeah, no, if I do it to all of them, it'll be fine. I then attached the grip pieces one at a time, starting from the base and moving up the hilt until I had 12. I totally just had to rip out all those and then put them back in to fix the spacing. Now I'm actually one space short, but I can fix that by simply taking an offcut and putting it on the bottom. Then rather than tunneling out the center of a full dowel for that portion above the grip, I used my remaining tunneled out EVA foam half dowel for the top of the saber, and then glued the halves back together to form a hole. Just save some time. Alright, now before I add any more detail, I'm gonna need to level these off. Partly because a couple of them are a little uneven, but mostly because they're not actually totally rounded. There's a great close-up in Phantom Menace where Obi-Wan's trying to, force move it. If you're watching this video, you know what I'm talking about. And you can see the tops are leveled off. So I'm gonna do that on the belt sander. I took it up to the belt sander and cleaned it off a bit before I started. I'm not sure that was actually necessary because the belt sander will eat away at EVA foam regardless of the little bit of grit that was left in there from the helper build. I guess that was just a force of habit because I also sometimes have to refine my kyber crystals on this belt sander, and if I don't clean it, I end up with EVA dust in my kyber crystals. Hashtag maker problems. When I was finished sanding the top of the grip flat, I took it back inside and trimmed off that fuzz that you sometimes get after sanding foam. Then I cut an 1.5 piece of dowel to be used as the pommel. To help secure it, I needed to add a stopper inside the PVC pipe. For those, I'm going to use EVA foam circles. I already have a lot of those offcuts left over from previous projects where I had to drill a hole. I found one that would fit inside the pipe snugly, shoved it in there, then I glued the pommel over it with super glue. All this is just to prevent me from knocking the pommel off once the blade is in there. Oh, also the belt sander isn't necessarily a precision sanding tool, so I had to refine some of its handiwork with my rotary tool. Then where the saber widens at the top, I added a strip of craft foam. Try to keep it within the gray squares so there's some contrast and you guys can actually see it. You know what, just there we go. That almost actually works as just a very simple lightsaber. Now let's get some more detail on that. This is already cut at a slant. It's left over from, I don't know, some long forgotten helmet. Every few weeks I do another Stormtrooper variant. I glued that on there as well. It's going to need a lot of refinement. Oh my god, what is that? It's a pimple! My lightsaber has a pimple! My god. Okay, so that's gotta be sanded. How the hell? So I sanded that down and obscured it with a strip that actually is meant to go there on the pommel. Actually, it's a bit below, but the outer casing is going to end up covering it up. I did have to sand it though, otherwise that bump would be visible in the outer casing. It has an even narrower strip detail, which I also applied. Then I cut a length of EVA foam triangle bevel and carefully cut it in half lengthwise to get the top bevel. I glued it on. Then I filled in the seams with fast dry putty. For the widest ring at the top of the emitter, I took a spare foam circle and cut a hole out of the center using a sharpened and pipe. It's important that this hole is just a little bit narrower than the Saber's PVC pipe so that it will fit on snugly. The edge is beveled on that as well, and if I'm being totally honest, it's a real pain to cut those beveled triangle strips in half, so instead I sanded a bevel into the emitter ring on my belt sander. When I was finished making the emitter head, I fit it over the PVC and glued it in place. Then I began making and attaching more strips of 2mm EVA foam to the hilt. This lightsaber hilt is essentially all grip. This much pressure exerted on something as flexible as foam will usually result in the foam bending and making your cut come out not straight. To combat this, I'm continually sharpening my blade as well as weighting down the foam with a heavy piece of steel. As I cut the strips out, I attach them to the Saber. There's supposed to be 2 by the emitter and 5 by the switch. Again, all grip. So I noticed a flaw here that I just want to point out. Each of these grip pieces is about 1 millimeter too thick, and all that adds up to the grip portion extending at least a centimeter, a little more than a centimeter, really centimeter and a half higher than it should go, meaning that when I get these in place, there won't be enough room for the activation switch. So the compromise I'm making is that I'm just going to cover up those 2 notches with the wider band, like double wide than this, for the switch, and just be cool with there being 2 less notches on mine than on the movie version. Okay, so the first 2 went on pretty easy, but because of this bite that I carved out of here, if I lay this flush, it's going to be pretty noticeable. So, I'm going to fix that by taking a sliver of cylinder that I carved off of an offcut and gluing that in there to make up the difference. I used the same method to cut the wide band as I did the narrow ones. So because the diameter changes here and here, that's going to create some bends in the outer casing that are just going to make it look really sloppy. Also, there's supposed to be 3 oval openings in the outer casing, which are going to be kind of hard to paint. So to solve both of those problems, I'm going to put a strip of foam down the spine, let's say, and that will prevent those awkward bends. Might make it look a little squarish on either side, but I'm taking a lot of close-up looks at that shot where it's lying on the floor when Obi-Wan's trying to force pull it, and it looks kind of squarish to me. I attached that spine strip and then began making the outer casing. This took some figuring out because it's kind of an unusual shape. Luckily, it's symmetrical, so once I figured it out on one edge, I was then able to transfer it to a scrap piece of cardboard and trace it to the other side. I'm using a paint pen because it's easy to see. Although I do have to paint this, I suppose you could make the whole thing out of white foam and use a Sharpie. It's up to you. Once the casing shape was complete, I wrapped it around the hilt to make sure it would fit. Satisfied that it would, I mapped out where I wanted the holes to go. I carefully cut those out, and then I carefully glued on the casing. I tried to cover up as many of the sloppy seams as I could, but unfortunately, a few of those were visible within the oval cutouts. So I filled those in with fast dry putty. I swear I have that exact switch somewhere, but can't for the life of me find it, so I made one out of foam, starting with this 4mm thick EVA foam O-ring that I took out of a remote control car, although you could easily make one using the pipe and pen casing method. This is kind of a complicated button, so for its narrower portion, I cut a thin segment of narrow EVA foam dowel and glued it on top of the O-ring. Then for the final top circle, I cut a piece of 2mm EVA foam. I glued another O-ring to the main switch panel. It's actually just the base of the final switch. Before attaching that final switch though, I had to paint the Saber. To prep for paint, I give it a very quick blast to the heat gun. This seals up the surface of the EVA foam, making it less absorbent when I paint. Before painting, I locked it into a machinist block and then started with a layer of flat black house paint because it dries quicker and it's easier to spot the areas that I miss on the first pass. If you start with a reflective paint, then you might mistake some of the white surface peeking through as glare. I touched up those missing areas and then applied the additional coats using gloss black latex house paint. I did this because I found the gloss black base coats will make for the best shine when applying a top coat that has to be metal. Also, the black parts that are visible on the Saber seem to have a bit of a shine to them. I also usually have to do several layers on EVA foam to get a really shiny surface. Sometimes you can get away with fewer coats by slathering the paint on thicker on a flat surface, but that tends to create drips which harden into the surface and become visible after shinifying it. When all 3 coats had dried, I then painted the outer casing silver with Molotow chrome. Don't forget the top. I'm brushing it on perpendicular to the length of the Saber so that the brush strokes create a machined metal texture, if they're visible at all. You could also airbrush it if you happen to have an airbrush. When that had dried, I attached the final switch, which I did using a knurled thumb screw. These are usually used as computer feet, but not today. I glued it in place. Then for the blade, I found a dowel that would fit loosely into the PVC pipe and I wrapped it with reflective safety tape. Because the adhesion on that tape isn't fantastic over a curved surface, I then wrapped it with clear packaging tape, which holds a lot better. I know that the LED blades are popular, but in photographs, those don't really look so good. It's a thing with camera flashes canceling out the LED blades, which really only look good in low light. But reflective tape will throw nearly 100% of that flashbulb light straight back into the camera, actually causing what would be considered a lens flare, but it ends up looking like actual lightsabers. So that's what I've been doing. Hey, it was good enough for the original trilogy. Good enough for me. Con photographers hate me. And of course, all lightsabers need a kyber crystal. This I had to steal from a Jedi, but just so that you don't have to go through all that, they're also available in my Etsy store, link below. And there we go. Now that I have finished Qui-Gon's lightsaber, I can combat the true threat to the Chosen One, Naboo Senator Princesses. Really? The dress wasn't enough? The blade has to be rainbow too?
It's cute!
Do you have any idea how long that takes to edit? Hey everybody, thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, then you can show your support by hitting the like, subscribe, and bell icon to be notified of future uploads. If you're interested in supporting the channel, then you can check out the link in the description down below for patron channel services. Anything pledged goes towards improving the video quality, prop quality, and shop equipment, which allows me to produce higher quality content for you all to enjoy. Alright, happy crafting. See you later. I'm a Sith with glasses.